and welcome to the Mars Mindset Podcast, where we talk about personal development, psychology, preparation, and so much more. Today, I had the opportunity to speak with a man named Adam Lane Smith. Adam is a retired psychotherapist turned attachment specialist. In this conversation, we talk about what is attachment, the different types of attachment, and the impact that it has on society as a whole. This was definitely one of my favorite conversations that I've had. I think it is extremely relevant today and can be life-changing information for you, your loved ones, people in your family, and your own personal relationships, everything. It's very important information. And so without further delay, please enjoy this episode with Adam Lane Smith. Hey, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real honor to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
For the audience out there who maybe is not totally familiar with your work just yet, would you mind sharing with them a little bit about yourself and how you got to this point?
Sure. So I'm Adam Lane Smith. I'm an attachment specialist. People ask, what the heck is an attachment specialist? It's a job I've had to create. I used to be a licensed psychotherapist, marriage and family therapist specifically. And when you have a license to practice psychotherapy, you can practice in one state here in the United States out of 50. No internet, no long distance, and no international coaching, nothing. You can't coach either at all, because even coaching is considered therapy. So my brand got really big. People started taking on my message about attachment really hard. And I got so many calls from out of state and internationally. I just finally said, you know what? I'm going to take this big. I'm going to teach everybody, and then I'll coach whoever wants me. So that's where I am now.
That's really interesting. So for one, I did not know that you couldn't coach people across state lines. That's very interesting. And I have been hearing more and more about what attachment and understanding the concept of this, and sort of, if you understand this in your relationship, I hear it makes your relationships better. Could you touch on, makes everything better. Could you define that sort of in your own words?
Yeah. People always ask, what is attachment? For the longest time, I knew it, and it was something I could teach, kind of, but I didn't have the exact definition. And it's easier when you know. Attachment is the way that one human being connects to another human being. You create a circular reciprocal relationship of caring mutually for each other. Secure attachment is you're able to form those reciprocal circles with other people. You're able to give and receive love with other people without hiccups, without anxiety, without terror of abandonment. You're able to just trust that other people will be there and will be manageable and will be good and honest. And if they're not, it's not going to be the end of the world. You step back and you have all the other healthy relationships to fall back on. Unhealthy attachment, insecure attachment, comes in 3 different flavors. That's a whole other talk. But the insecure attachment is the belief that people don't want to help you. It comes from your brain learning early on that your parents don't love you, or you don't perceive that they love you. It can come from being in daycare when you're an infant and your brain perceives that your parents are abandoning you during the day. And then they come home exhausted and don't have time for you. The brain, when you're a little kid, if you're abused, neglected, your parents are depressed, don't have time for you for that. Well, your brain says, whatever happens is my fault. I cause whatever happens in my environment. And that's good when you're learning about gravity. It's bad when you're learning about attachment if your parents aren't teaching that to you. And we have, in the last 100 years, attachment is broken so bad here in the West that about half of Americans have an attachment problem now and don't even know what it is. And so they don't believe that they can give and receive love. They don't know how to open up and connect to the people around them. They don't know how to get their needs met. They don't know how to be honest. They don't know how to relax in their relationships. So many people who think they're introverts and say, I am utterly exhausted by even the tiniest social interaction. That's not being an introvert. That's usually having anxious attachment styles, what that is. Most people just don't know what it is.
Wow, that's amazing. So this is one of those things I can already tell is something that when you put words to it and you define it, it's like a term that you understand, you can add to your vocabulary. It becomes a concept in your mind. And once you have that, it gives you a new lens of looking at the world, right?
Absolutely.
One thing that I want to dig in on that you mentioned there is that, attachment in the West. And when I hear the West, of course, I think of, just kind of this modernity in, like the United States, Western Europe, whatever. Is there a difference in the East if you were to look at, the other side, right? The other side of that coin there, or is this more of a statement of like, with modernity comes these issues, when we're separated from maybe a more natural maybe like tribal existence or something. Like how could you define that further?
Yeah, absolutely. So how it kind of looks differently on other sides
Yeah,
in
like
the East.
how
Yeah.
are other cultures in a different situation?
So it really depends on the culture. When I say the last 100 years in the West, since World War One, ours has been breaking, and then everywhere we touch, it seems to spread into that culture. So I look at Japan, and post World War II, their culture started sliding really hard into attachment issues, where now they are faced with such massive attachment issues that one of the previous prime ministers was begging the population, please get in relationships, please have children. Our population is about to disappear. Like if they're it's almost funny, but it's so sad. And they're writing articles over there about men retreating completely from relationships. It's happening in other cultures. It is happening across the world. The West has kind of led the way on this, though, unfortunately, in the last hundred
Got it.
years. I do see it happening in a lot of major cities, especially in the East. That does seem to be one difference is over in the East, it seems like outside of their major cities, there's still a lot of healthy attachment. Here in the West, even outside of major cities, even more rural areas still do have some broken attachment pieces just because it does seem to be spreading here.
That's very interesting. And I've heard things about like, Japan where apparently they sell more adult diapers than baby diapers and things like that, where they're facing demographic issues. And I think about demographic issues quite a bit. I feel there's many things that people don't consider with that, especially in the United States. Like we need new people. It's something Elon Musk talks about all the time is like if you don't
Mhm.
he says if you don't make stuff, there's no stuff. If you make no people, there's no civilization, right? Um, so I'm curious, to get your take on sort of what is the source of this issue. Where if you were to try and lead it back to the source, I'm sure there could be many of them, but if there were some maybe more common sources or things that you suspect are creating this issue, where would you place it?
How much time do we have?
all the time you need to explain this.
Okay.
I'm uh
So
yeah.
let's travel back in time about 105 years, 110 years. The world is not perfect by any means. I'm not going to paint a perfect picture, but about 100, 110 years ago, most Americans lived rural areas. They lived on farms. They lived in tight communities where they would not travel anywhere more than 15 to 20 miles from the place they were born through their entire life. It was very concentrated. We're talking just prior to the automobile becoming really popular. Americans, very settled, very rural, not perfect, but when you're in a tight knit, small community, what happens is you cannot really lie to the people around you. They know you and you know that they know you. So you are exposed for who you are and you have to live with that and be that. And that's its own problem, but you don't face this constant imposter syndrome. And you had giant family networks. So if your parents were not perfect, if there were issues, you had 10 aunts, you had 20 uncles, you had 40 cousins, your grandparents, your great grandparents, and your great great grandparents were all alive. You had all these generations that could take care of you and step in. And a child only needs about three people, a human adult even only needs about three people to totally accept them, for them to feel loved and lovable, and to fix your attachment, to have good attachment. Your parents or about three healthy people. That's kind of the balance point. And you need to get the context for why your parents are flying off the handle. If no one explains that context in simple enough terms, the child's brain says, this is me. If the child's brain can slowly work with that, if you have a loving aunt and grandparents who take care of you, you can get that fixed. So it's much more of a self-correcting system. Families were self-correcting systems back then. Fast forward into industrial revolution, into World War One, into all of the lost generation who got just pushed through a meat grinder in World War One, all through the West. You had just broken family systems. A whole generation was lost. A whole generation, especially of young men, was lost. You had just even the ones who came home were lost. You had all these families torn apart. Suddenly, all the families moved into cities because that's where the jobs were, and families then had to work 16 hours a day. Fathers did, so they hardly ever saw their father. The mother was now alone and had to take care of all 12 kids. Families cracked apart, so the self-correcting systems gone, and they moved into unfamiliar territory where they didn't own anything. They were now renting. They were now begging for jobs, and it was this horrible circumstance. it kind of like, okay, this is livable. Not really. You got the roaring 20s, which was all this excess of I need to feel better. I need to blow off steam. You had the Federal Reserve came in and flushed the whole nation with cash here. And then it crashed. Then it crashed. Everything was destroyed. And all that movement that had happened with Americans moving into cities got 5, 10 times worse with the Dust Bowl, with the Great Depression, the stock market crash. And then that led into the war over in Europe, all kinds of war running through Europe and the tension and trying to rebuild with Germany and everything. And then into World War II and the greatest generation and the silent generation fighting over there, fighting Nazis, just surviving this. They came back and had the baby boomers, and they'd lived through all these atrocities, and their family systems were broken. No more correcting family, self-correcting family systems, scraping for a living, barely feeding their kids. And their form of love was to work themselves to death and say nothing about it. That was their form of love. About half of the baby boomers got it and said, my parents love me. And about half the baby boomers said, these people don't care about me at all. All they do is yell at me. And then when they gave me my inheritance, it was a pile of rusted nails that they thought was special. I don't like these people. Screw these people. And now I have an automobile. And then I have all this free hippie love and drugs, and everything came out. And then cars came out, and you could drive 100 miles away. You could get up and move to another town, and who cares? Then your systems were gone. So why not move? It's just your old man, and all he does is yell at you. So they scattered, destroyed the family system, and then led all these cultural revolutions that destroyed any hope of even going back to those old systems into this totally new system of total consumerism. Corporations came in and said, yes, that's great. Every family member should pay their own rent on separate apartments. Every family member should have all their appliances. Every family member should have all these different things they're paying for and utilities and renting. This is great for the economy. Moms moved into the workforce. Everybody's working. Children are raised by daycare. Children are raised by strangers. All this is just shattering. And then it gets worse. The baby boomers then had the Generation X and Generation Y, who were raised in the old system with the old family values that no longer had any basis. And then they were completely rug ripped out from under them. For the world that they were raised to live in did not exist. So Generation Y and Generation X just basically stand there with like deer in the headlights, thinking like, what's happening? Baby boomers despise them because they just say, why are my children just so weak? Those broken baby boomers, not all of them, not all baby boomers are that way, but the half that are started divorcing, and they spread messages like, sometimes love just doesn't work. Sometimes people just fall out of love. It's not a big deal. Who cares? Kids are resilient. We're just breaking up the family. Stop being dramatic. And the kids learned families can just explode. People can just fall out of love. Love is nothing. So baby boomers went on into their second marriage and had the millennial generation, and said, I'm not going to raise those weak kids like I did in my first generation marriage. I'm going to raise tough kids. So they tried to copy themselves onto the next generation. And that's why millennials and boomers hate each other, because they were supposed to be like the clones that didn't work out. They're the clones that rebelled. And because they were raised in a world where there are no family values, no families worth having values for, none of these systems are intact. And all that loving system from 100 years ago is make believe and pretend that they've never actually seen. That happens on movies, but that didn't really happen. And they're raised by boomers with all the messaging of all that stuff was evil and stupid. Nobody needs that stuff. All they did was hold me back, man. Millennials rebelled, angry, hating all of it. Generation Z comes along. Generation Z has never seen a functioning society, a functioning family, a functioning anything, and they think everybody else is insane. And they are going through an absolute meat grinder of meaningless life, where they are either completely messed up and depressed, or they are fumingly angry and ready to go to war and lead this grand crusade to wipe out the other side that they think is holding them back from living a fulfilling life. It's either I'm going to kill myself, or I'm going to just blow the crap out of everybody else so they'll leave me alone. That's the split. All of this is why attachment has got so broken, because all of these family systems have no idea how to give and receive love. There's no connection. There's no self-correcting systems. And that messaging of love is good, love is kind, and your family will always love you, and your parents will love you, and you are good and you deserve love, that's gone. That's attachment in the West in the last 100 years.
Wow. Okay. Lot to take apart here. So for one thing that I want to open up here with is, you describe the generation to generation, these handoffs and the pendulum swing as we move through time, right? I have to ask you, have you read Generations, the book by, I think it's Neil Strauss and Lewis Howe or something like that?
It's on my reading pile. I've got a big reading pile. Tell
me
about it.
Okay. Well, the reason why I asked that is because this was my introduction to all of these generations and to give people context, right? Because you hear of millennials, you hear of boomers, and then you hear of these other generations and all in between and everyone. And the authors of that book, Generations, they are the ones that came up with many of the names for these generations. And
interesting.
And if you, for the audience, if you haven't heard of this kind of way of thinking or read any of the books like that, I think another popular one by those authors is The Fourth Turning, which was their follow-up book. And this is a very unique way of looking at history because it gives it, you perceive history through a new lens. It's not just important people or important events, but more so what happened to different people at different stages of their life and how did that impact the way that they grew and evolved and how they would raise their kids, for instance. And so I think this has a lot to do. It's very interesting to hear, your perspective going through time through the past 100 years or so with that generational frame, but through the eyes of like sort of this, how they describe love and describe relationships, right? That leads me to the next thing that I want to ask you about here, which is where does that leave us today with this situation? When you look at the generation today where things are broken, I generally believe that the pendulum will keep swinging, right? So if things are as, sort of broken apart as they could ever be, to me, that means things must eventually go back together. But I'm curious, you absolutely have more expertise in this space. Where do you place things?
I think that things must go back. I think it will be ugly before they do. I think that there are a lot of people invested in things not going back. And I think that a lot of people don't know how to go back because they're just like Generation Y and Generation X were raised to live in a world of family values and peace and harmony and connectedness and good, where you can go play outside until the street lamps come on and nobody's watching you, but you're safe. And then that world no longer exists. Generation Y and Generation X are just like these complete outliers who have nowhere and nothing of their own. I think that if we shift back when the pendulum when it does, I think that there will be a lot of people left behind too. And I think it'll be worse because now it's entire multiple generations of people who don't believe love is possible, don't believe love exists. They don't think it's possible for them. They think that love is a fairy tale and that it just isn't going to happen. It's not trustworthy. And it's because there's something innately wrong with them deep down on the inside that makes them unlovable. And if anybody else sees it, the game is over. They'll be rejected. They'll be abandoned and everyone will see it and they'll lose everything. And at the end of the day, they'll be living under a bridge and they might as well just lose their life. That's the fear with attachment, is that it's all going to snowball and be completely over in its death. It's really fear of death. Abandonment tied to death or severe pain and vulnerability tied to death. That it takes a lot of work to undo that. It takes a lot of work. A lot of people though, it's amazing when I talk about this message, so many people pick up on it and it's like they are finally hearing the words they needed to hear and now they can do the work. And when they do it, the change is incredible and it's fast. It's amazing how fast the change can take root in someone when they're ready to change. It really is. So I do think that there will be good changes. I see Generation Z, and like I said, it's a meat grinder. They are either going to destroy themselves or they're going to soldier on and push through and take back what they want, whether anyone lets them or not. And that second half, they drink up attachment like a sponge. I teach them this. I have 12-year-olds when I was doing psychology or psychotherapy. I'd have 12-year-olds come in brutally depressed, but in that second camp, like wanting to do something about it, I teach them attachment. And it was like the lights went on in their eyes, man. Totally different person walking out of the office. So there is hope. There absolutely is hope. It will just be messy.
You got to break some eggs to make an omelet, right? Like I imagine this is one of those things where it would be natural. It seems like the natural course of things. Like it seems like when we're in a more, let's say, primal state of living, right? Like one where you're much more attached to just nature in the land, like the one that you described pre-automobile in the United States, right? It sort of forces this connection amongst people. It forces, like you have to have like humans grew up with or evolved with a tribe, right? A tribal environment where you have that social acceptance, or where you have a lot of people around, like you described earlier, whether that's relatives or just other adults around that you can trust, that can help take care of you and raise you and things like that. So it seems like it is a natural mode of being, and that we've just drifted off of that with technology, consumerism, and these things. And so being able to describe these things in lucid, like very clear terms, is what's so interesting to me. And what's so interesting about what I find about the work that you do is that, you know, you're bringing your vocabulary to people. On Twitter is where I found you. And when you have that mode of thinking, you can start to return back to a more natural way of sort of having relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah. You think that Homo sapiens have been on this planet for 200,000 years. We had the Neolithic revolution about 11,000 years ago. For the first 190,000 years, we were wandering tribes, living in caves, and then living in tiny little, traveling huts if we could. But you could not hide. You could not hide anything from your tribe. They knew when you were going to the bathroom. They knew when you were blowing your nose. They knew everything about you. And that sounds horrifying to us, partly because so many of us have attachment issues that we believe there's something wrong with us deep down on the inside. And that level of scrutiny is terrifying, because we believe we would be obliterated because of that level of scrutiny. Not because we're evil on the inside, but we think we are. Not that we have something to hide, but we think that we do. That right there, that's a huge part of it. And we're meant to live in communal living. We're meant to live in a family network. We've tried to, let me say this. Our species is meant to have dopamine, serotonin, vasopressin, and oxytocin, and a ton of other brain chemicals flooding through us because of our moment-to-moment interactions with our tribe, being accepted by our tribe, having conversations with our tribe. Everything in that moment, we are supposed to be feeding all of this dopamine, this flood of good feelings and good neurotransmitters and hormones. And we don't get that now. So we binge everything else that gives us constant dopamine drip, sometimes some serotonin drip. But if you look at the numbers, something like a quarter of all American women are on antidepressants. It's because it's most of those target serotonin. Women are very susceptible, especially to those emotional and relational disturbances, and they're very keyed into those. They're built for those relationships. They're built to be sensitive. Most women, and the average woman is built to be very sensitive and engaged in her relationships. When they are completely shut off and isolated, they become terrified because they're vulnerable and naked in the wilderness. Think 100,000 years ago, a woman who was shut off, completely alone, living in a cave, and has to provide everything for herself, and has no tribe that will care about her whatsoever. And if she is hurt, sick, anything, she is alone and will die. That is worst case scenario. Fast forward to modern day, where it's an average woman living in an apartment. She has a job and she's taking care of her own bills, but she lives an almost totally isolated life. From the outside, from our perspective, we're like, dang, she's got it set. She eats, she does her job, she comes home, she plays with a cat, she watches Netflix. Her life is great. Her brain thinks it's absolute worst case scenario, because that's what her brain is primed to believe. So she is living in a living hell where her village is dead, everyone is dead, and she's now alone and is on the edge of death. So, and she believes it's her fault and she's unlovable and no new village will ever accept her. That's where we are. That's why we binge Netflix. That's why we have a sugar addiction. That's why it's so prevalent here and not other places. That's one reason. It's why we have the drug epidemics. That's why we have relationship pieces falling apart. That's why the boomers are now tripling the divorce rates in their 70s. They're still getting divorced and messing that up. That's why we binge all these things. We have all these addictions, and we're still heavily medicated and it's still not solving it. So we have a suicide epidemic. That's why all of that's happening, is because we are built to be connected to a loving, self-correcting family network, that tribe. We're built for that.
Wow. So I want to ask you about the medication aspect of it, if you can speak on that, which is, which I feel is there is absolutely a use. And I know people personally who have benefited from, different antidepressant, anti-anxiety medications that they've been prescribed. But in my own world, I've considered, I think about these things, and, like I think a lot of people experience depression and anxiety, and some people find means of avoiding that, or, whether that's having a loving, supporting family network, or if that's some other, sort of natural alternative, whatever. And from your perspective, do you see, like, when you look at the number of people, you mentioned that statistic of how many, young women are on these, are prescribed these drugs, and you see how many people are using this, how often, and this is, I'm sort of asking you to guess here, so I apologize, but how much of this do you think is related to attachment and just missing this social family connection compared to, legitimate purposes for these drugs,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are legitimate purposes. I'd have people come in when you're in an extreme circumstance and nothing is helping, and you are worst case scenario, but also severely depressed and can't get up and do the work. Medication absolutely has a role to play to give you enough strength to get up and then start doing the work. And that is the role that most medications probably should play, is to help you start, to help you build up. It's like splinting a tree. It's like putting that support on tree to help the tree grow, and eventually the tree shouldn't need it anymore. This concept of just take a pill and take 5 pills and eventually there will be enough. I have seen so many problems where someone starts taking one antidepressant and it's not working enough. So then they get on a second antidepressant. That's not working enough. So they start taking an anti-anxiety medication and that's not quite doing it right. So they have an additional piece that's supposed to augment all 3 of them together when you take them. So you start taking the 4th. And then you start gaining massive amounts of weight because it's throwing off all kinds of brain chemistry and it still isn't helping. So you're binging all kinds of other things to feel better. And then you're now on 4 different medications and you can barely function. You have all these bad side effects. I've seen that a lot. Too much. Too much. Yes, those medications have good uses, and some people do require them for some purposes. But the majority of cases, I would say, are at least based on bad broken attachment, because broken attachment leads to so many other things. So many other things. And if it doesn't lead to them, it causes tremendous problems and makes them so much worse than they otherwise would be.
Wow. That's honestly shocking to me. That's, I'm not as familiar with this world of, layering additional medications on top of each other, correcting. And then of course there's side effects. You add in more medications, and that is truly shocking. I want to ask, you mentioned earlier, the difference between, secure attachment and insecure attachment. But I'm curious if you could describe maybe how someone would be able to identify this in their own state, do a mental analysis on themselves to see if they can identify their own attachment situation.
Absolutely. So the most common experiences I see especially between anxious attachment and avoidant attachment styles, which are the insecure types. Anxious is about being very eager to please, getting super in close, and then desperate to please. Avoidant is trying to keep people at arm's length, but both of them have very similar features. It's worrying constantly about what other people think of you, worrying about opening up and showing who you are, and that it's going to make you get hurt. It's the belief that if you show people who you are, they will think you are worthless. They'll say, aha, you are crap. They will turn their backs on you and you will mess everything up. It's playing a video game every time you have a social interaction, trying to make the other person not leave you, not get mad at you, just be happy and just try to feel good. And that's all it is. It's a constant video game with your interactions, which is why it's so exhausting. It's trying to get the perfect outcomes instead of building the relationship between the two of you. You can't. You really can't. It is just this ongoing fear that at the end of the day, you're going to have to just constantly be on guard all the time and do everything right and everything perfect and make everybody around you happy all the time, or it's going to start falling like a domino effect and you're going to end up losing everything. And it turns into doing nice things for other people. You do 10 nice things for them, hoping they'll love you for it. And if they do, hoping that they will read your secret needs that you're not allowed to say out loud, because if you do, they're going to say, you're a burden. I don't want to do that. No, you're not worth that. So you have to do nice things for them, hoping they will be so grateful that they will figure out what you want and do it for you. And then you will feel like that's a burden. So then you'll desperately try to make it up to them and say, well, how can I pay you back? What can I do? How can I help? You didn't have to do that for me. And it's this constant game of trying to get your needs met without ever opening up to other people. It's exhausting. And it is based on the belief that you can never open up and show people who you are because there's something wrong inside.
So if I understand this right, maybe I can restate it to you. Tell me if I'm accurate here. Is that if you feel like every social interaction that you're having is a chore and is something where it's you're focused on that value transaction always, that you could be having an attachment issue, as opposed to if things just feel they're not tiring to you, right? It feels just natural. It feels like you don't need to exert effort to have just relationships with people, whether that's a friendship or romantic relationship or whatever, that maybe you are not experiencing intense attachment issues.
You've got it there. It is when you have secure attachment, every social interaction is an opportunity to grow the relationship between the two of you and get to know each other better and come closer together. When you have an attachment issue, when you've got insecure attachment, every social interaction you have is an opportunity to mess it up and reveal yourself for being worthless and get abandoned. That's the key difference there.
Wow. Okay. That's very interesting. Are there situations, if you had a couple come in to your practice, right, and you're talking to them, is there, in the current state of things, and this is just great because you have so much real world knowledge with this, how often is it, one person has an attachment issue versus both people in a relationship have an attachment issue?
That is a good question. I have seen a lot of people who it's one person and the other person is fine. It seems like most of the time it's both. And it's because when both people have attachment issues, or when one person does, they do not want to open up and connect to the other person. So they don't want someone who's going to get super close and ask all those personal questions and be overly intimate emotionally, and be pushing all those questions, building solid goals, pushing and pushing, be doing everything good in their life and growing. They want somebody who is like them, who's more reserved, more nervous, more cut down, not pushing as hard. And especially people with attachment issues are looking for someone else with a problem, because then they can help that person with that problem forever and make that person so grateful that they were there for them during their bad times, that they saved them, they rescued them, that now they will stay with them forever, even if they ever accidentally find out that you're really worthless. It's needing somebody to need you. It's codependency is what that is. And that is most often what I see is those two, that pairing of two. And when a man and a woman, for example, get married and they both have attachment issues, it often goes, okay, they'll fight, but they can live until they have children. And what I really see is when they have children, the mom gets flooded with all this oxytocin during pregnancy, and then during birth, tons of oxytocin, some of the first that she's ever had in her life because she didn't experience much in childhood, and then flooded with more oxytocin every time she breastfeeds. And then often, if she has attachment issues, her oxytocin runs low anyway. So she has problems with lactation and problems with the milk supply. And I see a lot of moms with dried up milk supply or have attachment issues, and
Wow.
it's decreasing their oxytocin. Yeah, but it's amazing, that connection. But then they bond so intimately with their child, and because they never had love, they want their child to have all the love in the world. And so they work as hard as they can to give that child love. But now dad becomes a problem because dad has not oxytocin bonded and experienced this flood of chemicals. Dad becomes the outside guy who is just there, who doesn't do what's right to bond with the kids and build that healthy attachment. And then that creates discord between mom and dad. She starts trying to push him to be better. And he says, "What do you mean? I'm the same as I've ever been. Why are you now upset at me? I'm fine." And she gets more and more agitated as the kids become more and more obviously anxious. And she makes him into the enemy, and he becomes angry and starts yelling and feels like the outsider. And eventually they get a divorce because she fixed her attachment to some extent with her and her kids and wanted her kids to have attachment. And he didn't know what was happening. I wrote a book on this called Exhausted Wives, Bewildered Husbands, about wives who know there's a problem but can't pinpoint what it is. And dads and husbands were like, "I don't get this. What is happening? Why are you so angry at me all the time?" And the kids are caught in the middle, destroys the kids' attachment. And then they end up bonding with mom because she was the one who tried to bond with them. And then they end up all hating their dad because he's this horrible monster who doesn't care about our family and he's just angry all the time. That's that split. I've seen that so many times, so many times. That was the majority of divorces that I ended up seeing, was that exact circumstance right there, where one of them, usually the mom, grew out of the attachment thing and wanted to take it more seriously, and dad had no idea what was happening.
Wow. I'm just in a state of shock over this. It's very interesting that this pattern could be so consistent and also just so diagnosable. It's something that you can just clearly get to the root of here and sort of, see happen over and over again. If someone was listening to this right now and they were in a relationship, and maybe they sense that either themselves or their partner might have attachment issues and they want to bring this to the forefront. What do you recommend for that?
Great question, because you have to have a shared language about what is happening. If you
Yes.
just say, hey, I don't like this and I want to get closer, the other person has no idea. That's what happens with those husbands and wives, and it tears them apart over years and years and years. That's what happens is there's no shared understanding. They don't start off as monsters. They start off really loving each other and wanting it and loving their kids and wanting it to work. So the best thing that you can do, honestly, is talk about this, talk about the attachment, and then help them understand it. And I've got my YouTube channel, Adam Lane Smith on YouTube. If you type by Adam Lane Smith, what is attachment? I've got a 10, 15-minute video on there that runs you through a condensed version of what is attachment. And I tell people, they ask me that question, what can I do to talk to my husband or my son or my whoever it is? And I say, watch this video with them and go to them and say, hey, I think this is me. Can you watch this and tell me if you think this is about me? And they will, and their guard is down because they think they're going to just be helping you. And most times that person will have an insight and say, well, I think this is both of us. And that opens the door, because now you can start using words like attachment and nervous and boundaries and all these other words that lead into it. And then I've got a book. So my book is called Slaying Your Fear. It's on Amazon, Adam Lane Smith. And that book is 110 pages. It walks you through the program to fix this attachment in a few weeks, if you want to. I've run that
Wow.
program with people. I do coaching now. It's the program I run coaching through. There's clinicians all across the United States are using that book and that method, my method that I've built to fix attachment fast. I've had couples come into my office and they've just had an affair was just revealed 2 weeks before the first session. And by the third or fourth session, if they both fix their attachment, they were reporting higher satisfaction in their relationship than they ever experienced, even as newlyweds, even while dating. They are happier together than they've ever been. And this was what, 5 to 6 weeks after the affair was discovered. And they're both happier than they've ever been because they fixed their attachment, and that built greater intimacy than they've ever known. That right there is the power of attachment.
I mean, that's incredible. That's truly incredible. You know, for one, just the results you're describing. Two, to have developed a method to deliver results like that. I need to ask, how did you get into all of these things? What drove your interest in this space?
So I grew up in an extended family with generational attachment issues, where every generation tried to get better and better and better. And my generation, the last couple generations, produced 3 different psychotherapists and multiple mental health workers. So something wasn't quite right in that family. But I went to school. It's a 6-year program to get your master's degree, and I studied under not just academic professors, but professors who were top in their field and then brought in to teach. So it was the blood and guts in the trenches. This is what it is. This is what we're seeing. And they educated us to the best as they could. But attachment in schools is usually taught as, this is not important for adults. It only matters for kids. Don't worry about attachment if you're just working with adults. Attachment all problems, the diagnosable ones, will always turn into conduct disorders and issues like that, which will always grow into personality disorders. And you will diagnose the personality disorder and probably retroactively diagnose attachment issues later. Don't worry about it. That's what we were taught, more or less. And that's the general principle in psychology right now, and especially in America. And then I went into my practical field and practicum, which is an internship. I worked with death penalty inmates and people who had murdered multiple people and tried to burn their spouse alive and mutilated their own children. And I worked with them, and I was seeing similar stories of, wow, your parents really didn't love you. You never really learned how to give and receive love at all, did you? This kind of looks like attachment. No, it can't be. They told me not to worry about that. Went into my job, started doing in-home treatment with people severely disabled due to mental illness, helping them with problems, people who hadn't left their home in a year, people who hadn't been able to go grocery shopping in months and had other people doing it for them. They had to jumpstart their life from zero. And I'd go in and start rebuilding that. And so often rebuilding it meant rebuilding the belief that they deserve to be loved. And I was thinking, this sounds like suspiciously like that attachment stuff we're not supposed to worry about. And I was blessed with a wonderful supervisor. And I said, man, I'm kind of wanting to diagnose this guy with something I'm not allowed to diagnose him with. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, well, reactive attachment disorder, but you can't diagnose anyone with that past childhood. And he said, Adam, is that what fits? I said, yes. Yes, he has generalized anxiety disorder, but this fits it just does. And he said, then diagnose him with it. Who cares? Who cares what the book says? If you know this is right, do it. And I said, well, okay, I'll put it like a secondary, like rule out diagnosis, maybe, because you're just not supposed to for insurance purposes. So I put that in there, but I just in my head. And I ran across this brilliant book from another individual named No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover. And it was groundbreaking for me to hear him just nakedly say, this is attachment. This is a problem. Here's this. And here's why men in the West are having this problem. And here's what men should do about it if they want to start dating better. And it was this book about how men can be dating and in their love lives and great advice. And I said, this is fantastic. It's geared toward men. And I try to make people read it and they wouldn't read it. So like almost 300 pages. So I ended up buying all these hardback copies and giving them out and never would see them again. And the people would disappear because they didn't want to read the book. So I said, I got to write something. So I wrote Exhausted Wives, Bewildered Husbands. And I said, I'm going to write an attachment pamphlet, a 100-page book for couples who hate reading. And I started handing that out, and it was just explosive, the results that I would get. And people would freak out. They would actually read it and say, this is amazing. I can't believe this is. And so I'd run them through the program in there of how to fix their relationship. And then they begged me, please make a book for individuals. And I said, okay, I'll do the same method for individuals. So I built that 110 pages, put it on Amazon, boom, just as it exploded. And that's what led to me being yanked out of therapy and into international coaching. Was just people want it. They need it. And so I've started talking about attachment everywhere I go. And I found that there are a few people in this space talking about it, trying. There are a few people in it, but the message is not strong enough yet. We got to get the message louder and louder, which is exactly why I'm glad people like you are amplifying the attachment message.
Well, I'm glad you're amplifying it because I discovered it through you. I'm glad that there's someone on this quest to, repair the family, right? Is that what it comes down to, right? If you can have loving relationships again, then you can pass that on to your children. You can extend that into the future. And that's something that I care deeply about. I think it's something that everyone should care about. It's crazy that we don't care about that stuff. I think it's something that the next question I want to ask you is, I asked you sort of like, how do you have this conversation with a significant other, about attachment and things, but it sounds like something that people may want to talk to their parents or just their family, their siblings about as well to, maybe reunite the family unit here in a way that people aren't thinking of right now.
Parents are tough. Parents are the final boss of fixing your attachment because they're the ones who gave it to you. So even if they're wonderful people, you have to have a conversation wherein you say, the way you raised me damaged my ability to give and receive love. And hopefully they'll hear that and they'll say, well, let me hear more. And most parents are not there. So what I tell people is, if you have a partner first, then friends, then find new friends if you can, and then siblings, and then parents, usually in that order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make healthy friends first, even for siblings, unless you're really close to your siblings. Some siblings, it seems like a crapshoot. It's not really. It's the siblings. If you know your sibling is going to be open to you, they probably will be. If your sibling tends to side with your parents all the time, they probably will get defensive and side with your parents over this. I've seen that a lot too. So it really depends. Parents are the final boss. Go with your partner and your friends first.
Wow. What does a future look like to you if if you could snap your fingers, you have a magic wand, you can fix everyone's attachment issues or do the best possible job? What does that look like to you, if there was a new generation?
I'm thinking like digital, I don't want to say this, family collectives that live together without being stifling and oppressive, living together, but optimizing all the pieces that were not good for our first 200,000 years, optimizing them with modern technology, giving ourselves a little more good privacy without completely crumbling it so that we're isolated, giving ourselves the amenities, the freedom, the connection, and being able to connect with these large family systems that really control things, and not where one family controls everything on earth, but every family system is a good thing, and it gives benefits to every member so that nobody is alone unless they really want to be. Nobody has a reason to be binging things because they're satisfied in their relationships the way our brains are naturally meant to be. And nobody feels like they have to work themselves to death because their family system is right there and supports every individual member. So all of us have to work a little bit less. That's a big part of it too. Those family systems augmented the family systems we evolved for, but augmented with modern technology. That's what I really see.
Interesting. Do you have any examples of some of those things that we could correct with modern technology to kind of avoid the, maybe the other side of that coin that could be equally sort of
Yeah.
terrifying to people?
Absolutely. So the hunter-gatherer societies for the first 190,000 years, first 189,000 years, they didn't establish necessarily a harsh hierarchy of elites on the top or anything like that. There was not one big mean main boss and people were below them. There wasn't a caste system, nothing like that. There was definitely a leader and various leaders, and especially leaders in multiple different roles who could alternate based on the circumstance. And leaders led by gaining the respect of their people instead of by fear. Because if you're in a tight knit community where you all have to work together, the leader who rules by fear is quickly killed or replaced, or his tribe drives them into extinction. We are built to reward good leaders who love and care for their people because they thrive and grow and they populate very quickly also. So that system gave way with the Neolithic Revolution because we were able to generate surplus, and then somebody had to take control of that surplus, and then someone had to hire guards for that surplus, and someone had to maintain the system so that we wouldn't die and the system wouldn't collapse. We couldn't just wander around with the food. We had to now grow our food, so we had to control when it grew and where and how much, and control for famines. So someone had to be in charge, and then you started elevating a whole new class. And then they had their guards come in who got fed pretty well to control that surplus for them and keep it away from other people who wanted to get a hold of it. And it started just booming into this out of control class structure where some people, I don't want to say some people have and have not. I'm not a communist or anything like that. But the family system started cracking because one family was better than another family simply because they were higher up the hierarchy ladder instead of a meritocracy, instead of this is what I can do, this is the value I can bring. I think that with this, we could correct that. With those family systems, they would become internal countries of their own, but built on genuine love instead of built on exploiting strangers. It would be built on that genuine love and care within a family network. That's the difference. The family itself would almost be like a miniature state, and that would take care of the needs of those individuals instead of outsourcing it to strangers in the government who don't really care. That would solve so many of those problems but also bypassing all those other problems that everyone has brought up. If you build up the family, you have less need for a state. That's really it.
Wow, that's very interesting. And it's fascinating about that is just I've been reading some history recently, and when you learn about whether it's ancient Rome or ancient Greece, like that was the foundational unit of these governments. It wasn't, people were not individualized. It was all about your family. And it was about groups of families that represented different, chunks of the population and things like that. That the family unit really is like, that is supposed to be the smallest divisible unit of, whatever, a nation or a, unified group of people, whatever you want to call it, not so much the individual, because it's just at that level it's isolating, and it's yes, the situation that we're in today, right?
Yeah.
Wow, very interesting. So in your practice, I'm curious, are there other, is there resistance to these ideas? Are there
Yes. A lot of people have avoidant attachment issue. And when I talk to them about good, loving family systems like this, they freak out and they call me a communist or a Maoist. And they say, you want all of us to be under the control of somebody who hates us. And there is no such thing as a family that loves each other. And this is a living hell you're describing. How dare you? And they take it very personally, and they start making really personal attacks. I've had that happen. I have had people lead cancel mobs against me for saying that families should love each other, and families should take care of the individuals, and individuals should not be erased or silenced, but the family should take priority because the family can give you the best security more than anything else can. I've had whole Twitter cancel mobs led against me multiple times for that message. When people don't want it and they're raised to believe that openness and intimacy is a terror, they will fight it tooth and nail.
That's very interesting to hear. I had no idea that you were vilified this way about, something so flagrant, something so controversial as saying that you'll be happy if you have a happy family. That's who would have thought? That's shocking. Well, I'm curious, sort of like, what do you recommend for someone that's, of course you have all your amazing content and everything. Where does, it's like, where do we go from here? I'd love to see your, I would like to have the magic wand where we can snap our fingers here and everybody understands attachment, knows where, knows how to diagnose it and to identify it in themselves and everything. And we can all move on with happy families. But, are there more actionable items that you generally prescribe?
Absolutely. So here's the journey that most people take when they meet me. They think I'm pretty cool on a podcast. Then they check out my free YouTube channel where I've got 100 deep dives on every way that attachment connects to your relationships, your family, addictions, religion. It connects to everything in a human being. And I'm putting out more guides, like 3 a week. I'm just pumping them out for free content to educate people. So there's a whole free university, Adam Lane Smith on YouTube. From there, people usually decide, okay, I've heard enough free stuff. I want to hear about how this guy fixes it. So I've got a $5 book, $4.99 on Amazon for Slaying Your Fear. It's the price of a fast food burger. And you get this book. It's a short book, but it's packed with what you need. It gives you targeted solutions. The first quarter is, what is attachment and how does it get broken? Second quarter is, all right, what does it look like when it's really broken and what happened with you? And then the second half is just chapter, just fix it this way, fix it this way, fix it this way. Here's the steps. Do exactly this in this order and have these conversations with these key phrases and do this and it will be good. And that leads people from there. They say, okay, I fixed my attachment and I don't know who to talk to about it. And I want to talk to people about attachment. I've got a Discord community, a paid digitally gated community that I'm building, the attachment circle, that is built for people who are passionate about attachment and they want to be around other people who are passionate about it, get troubleshooting help, talk through problems, talk through their ideas, and just immerse themselves in good attachment. And then from there, I've got one-on-one coaching for people who have specific targeted problems, where they would spend 3 years in therapy talking about how they feel about those problems. I jump in and I start talking to them about those problems, say, all right, here's every single step you need to solve that from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no steps missed. Go do this, and this will solve your problems. Come back and talk to me and tell me how it went. And if it didn't go right, let's troubleshoot it again. That's me, and that's my system. That right there seems to work best for most people. Some people are good with the YouTubes. Some people are good with the book, and that carries them through. Some people want more immersion, and I give that too. But that is everything everyone really needs. And I have walked, oh man, thousands of people, is it now? I've walked so many people through these programs now. It is amazing to see how fast someone can go when they are ready to make it happen. And it all starts with just hearing about what attachment is and even knowing that there's a better way to live.
That's incredible. That really is. And I'm so glad that you have this whole, so many different ways to get into this, starting with free YouTube, totally affordable books and content, resources, and everything up to one-on-one coaching. That's phenomenal. I have to ask, what is the number one, if they're working with thousands of people, I'm sure not everybody makes it through. What is the cause of people that don't make it to through your programs or get the results that they're looking for?
The biggest washout I see is people right at the beginning, because half of the battle, I'm not kidding you, half of the battle is even getting someone to believe that there's a better way to live, even getting someone to believe that attachment can be healthy. When I say there's people out there who have good, loving families that are connected, and you can build that, and you can build that connectedness and know that you deserve love and receive it from other people, that right there is too much for some people. And they say, nope, this dude is selling me a used car. I'm not interested. He's lying to me. I've never seen that, and I never will. And that right there is where most people jump off the boat, because they can't even believe that it's possible. If you can believe it's even possible, that you might even be a little bit wrong about that belief that you don't deserve to be loved. If you even believe that a little bit, that is already half the battle won right there.
Wow. That's fascinating. It makes sense too. Makes sense. I'm curious. I have another question for you if you got some time here.
Sure.
Have you seen any overlap with the program that you prescribe and the information that you talk about with psychedelic treatments?
Oh, I get that question a lot, and a lot of people are very interested in that. Psychedelic treatments can be, I've heard a lot of people have good use with them. I think that probably is what happening is it's disrupting their brain chemistry enough that it's giving them another shot at trying to open up and trying to learn new things, and it's building those different insight pieces. I don't know much about it myself, except what I've heard anecdotally, and a lot of people seem to enjoy it. Um, my program doesn't require it. I've had people do my program and use that and swear up and down that they make huge insight leaps while doing that. Maybe some people benefit from it, maybe some people don't. I haven't seen it hurt anyone trying it in my programs, but then again, I don't know who might be doing it maybe without full the full micro dosing. Maybe it's macro dosing. I'm not
Sure.
sure. I'd imagine that would make it worse. So that's something to be careful about. But I have had some people just claim that they have made some absolute astounding breakthroughs, and I talked to them afterward, and the breakthroughs are legit. So I will say that.
My completely unscientific theory here is that, those occasionally psychedelics used in the right environment with the right structure and everything can help you overcome trauma from your childhood. Can help you sort of eliminate some of that early childhood trauma that can put you in a state where I've seen this in friends where they're more forgiving of their parents. They sort of are able to let go of some of the trauma from their that they
So
don't
much
even realize
trauma
they
is
have.
so much trauma, it activates when you remember it. Your logical brain on the left diminishes so that you can fuel these emotional storms on the right, and then you cycle on the trauma, trying desperately to process it logically, but you can't because your emotional mind is in control and your logical mind is diminished. When you take those psychedelics, it messes up everything, and then you start processing differently. So I could understand if you could then go into a trip and process differently with a different mind state. You would process those memories differently than before. And once you process them on the left side of the brain, it eases a lot of that emotional burden and decreases a lot of the emotional pain that you're experiencing. So I could understand that. EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprogramming, also similar effect, not similar idea. It's the idea that the different eyes control the opposite hemisphere, or the opposite hemisphere controls the eye. So by doing this back and forth and tracking it, you're activating left, right, left, right, left, right. And then you think about the emotional, painful experience, and it forces it to process it on that left side brain for the first time in your life. Very similar, also diminishes the emotional pain from that experience. So EMDR, I'm sure people will ask about it.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, I've never even heard of that. I need to look into that. Are there
Yeah, that I've seen good stats. I've seen interesting research on the microdosing. I have seen phenomenal miracles occur with EMDR. I've seen that with patients. So definitely
wow,
something to look into right there.
that's fascinating. Are there any large misconceptions about attachment or this whole field that people generally get wrong?
The number one thing, and I say this, I hate attachment styles, not because they're wrong. I actually think they're right. I hate them because people do online quizzes and say, oh, my attachment style is anxious. That's who I am. That's who I will always be. It will never change. And this is just who I am now. So I have to accept my misery. And they have a name for it and they stamp it on and say, I am an anxious attachment kind of person. And they stop there. And that freezes them in time. And they never take the extra step to get better because they don't believe that there is a way to get better. That is the biggest misconception I see right there.
What is it about when you latch onto an idea like that and the fact that you're unable to sort of replace it or update it with a new way of thinking? Is that another psychological area that you're familiar with?
It does, but when you identify with something like that, it eases the burden on you. Instead of you being bad, you can put that on the thing. You can say, well, this is who I am. And I'm not saying that with every identity, but when you can identify that way with, for example, for a mental health problem, you don't have to work to get better, but you also don't have to blame yourself anymore. There's so much guilt and shame around mental health issues. And we've destigmatized, but maybe we've destigmatized a little too much in some regard because we still need to change. We shouldn't be shameful. It's not shameful to have mental health problems, but you shouldn't be stuck in them forever. You should also grow through them. If you can experience mental pain, the process of feeling pain is designed to help you reach an optimized state where you are no longer in pain. Your ability to feel pain is information. That's what pain is, and it demands a response. That response is reach an optimized state where the pain disappears, and then you'll be fine. So if you're in emotional pain, it means there's an optimized state you can reach that doesn't generate that kind of pain. That's feedback that you're supposed to use. If we just get stuck and say, well, I'm just in this pain and it's just who I am and I was born clinically depressed, that's not the right place.
Wow. So I want to take this all the way back to what you said in the very beginning here about how you were unable to practice across state lines. Because to me, when I think about the responsibilities of government, right, there's a lot of things that could be said about this. But one that I think is very important is demographics. It really should be, if anything, a chief responsibility of the government to plan. Do we have enough people? And do we have enough people to support the number of people that we're going to have that are old and will need to be supported? It's like there's one thing you could do for people is kind of give them guidance in that direction, right? At least in my opinion. And it sounds like that with, sort of the way the laws are in place, it's actually, it's limiting like your ability to do what you do in a way that would benefit the most number of people within that situation that has a direct impact on something so important as family relationships and demographics. Is the government in the way, or do they do anything to drive this initiative whatsoever? Is there any sort of increased awareness around this, or is there purely roadblocks in the way for making this more widely available or giving people the ability to do this more?
It is a perfect storm of state healthcare bureaucracy. Every single state operates multiple different individual boards. So there's usually 3 different mental health licenses, at least for each state, 3 different ones. So it's not one therapy license. And each state operates its own independent licensing requirements for those different ones also. So the boards have their individual power, and those vary by state. So you can't just take your license and go practice in another state, because another state may say you don't meet any of our requirements, you haven't matched up these things. So for example, the state I was licensed in, you have to have 4,000 hours of work before they'll allow you to even take the test to become a licensed psychotherapist. So you have to have a master's degree plus 4,000 hours of work in specific ways. Plus you have to be individually supervised by this person, but it has to be done at an exact ratio to this throughout the time of your licensure program. And it has to be within this amount of years, but you have to pay out of pocket, not only for the master's degree, but also for the individual supervision at something like $40 to $100 per hour for individual supervision. And you have to do that. And then you have to maintain all of these CEUs, these continuing education units. And those also vary by state, and they vary by license type. Even the different license types within a state will have different requirements to maintain that license and different training programs. And it's just an overwhelming headache. So then the Department of Human Resources, the DHS steps in, I should say, Department of Human Services steps in, and the government tries to mandate certain requirements. And each state individually then connects with the DHS and has their own requirements. And some go above and beyond, some state, and that doesn't even mandate it. And then the insurance companies come in and decide which different licenses are paid more or less based on what they feel is appropriate for different types of therapy. And it's just a mess. It is an absolute mess to try to even get that in the United States. It's as if every individual state is meant to operate in the United States as its own country, and it does. And that doesn't really work right now when we're so centralized and we just bleed back and forth into the different states. It doesn't work very well. And that's one reason why it just doesn't. We don't take mental health seriously here in this country. We really don't.
What would like an effective mental health action from the government look like? Have you ever considered it?
I don't think that the government could have an official mental health act that would unify the different boards and things, because then you just have the government controlling mental health, and every therapist would be a government employee, and it would be like the DMV. And I don't think that would go well. What I think would really be the case is a government-led initiative to restore power and health to the families through education to the families, and allow the families then to make those changes. That's what would have to happen. But then if the government stepped in and tried to mandate those changes and test the families and require things, and a CPS worker in every house stationed there to watch them, things like that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So getting government to solve the problems. Was it Ronald Reagan that said the scariest words on earth are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help"? You have to build the families back. Families must be built. Whoever does that, and whichever country on earth does that first, is going to be the most powerful country on earth, because the families with the nation with the strongest families becomes the strongest nation. So it behooves us to make that jump sooner rather than later.
Yes. Wow. And to be clear, I generally don't expect the government to do anything for me ever whatsoever. And I believe that in personal, you should really do this activity on your own and address this with yourself and your loved ones and your family. First and foremost, don't wait for the government to come riding on a white horse with a mental health program. Okay. It's not going to happen,
Right.
but
Right.
just curious if there's roadblocks in the way, because generally I feel like it's more of things need to be removed rather than things need to be created for this kind of medical environment.
We have people like me. If the government was serious, they would give me a platform and they would say, let's take Adam and let's put Adam on here and have Adam every night beam out an hour stream to all of these people and educate them in their homes, and whoever wants to tune in can, and Adam will teach these people about attachment. And then the next person will come on, Sarah will come on, and will teach everybody about the cycle of addiction and how to break it. And the next person will come on and will teach everybody about parenting. And if they were serious about that and ran that, that's what PBS was supposed to be. That's what some of those things were meant to be. And they were back in the day. If the government was serious, that's what they would do, is return control over to people. And I'm not saying me, but people like me, maybe even people smarter than me, and return some control to that and use their resources to educate the public instead of controlling the public and helping the public and making the public dependent.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's really, it's shocking because it's so simple. You could be streaming right from your home, I'm sure, as you are right now, right?
Everyone has a phone. They have free smartphones that they hand out to people who are financially underprivileged. Free smartphones that they could beam this from, and they have free Wi-Fi in various places at libraries. They could be streaming educational material in there about attachment and about families. That's really, if they did that, then I would take them seriously.
Have you considered joining forces with people in sort of related fields, like you mentioned addiction, like, have you considered joining forces with people to sort of create a coalition in this direction?
I have some very interesting things in the works right now that I will happily reveal in the future.
Excellent. I'm very excited about that. And you don't have to reveal that, but my next question for you was going to be, what are you excited about in the future here? What's next for Adam Lane Smith here?
I am excited about the person I talk to tomorrow, and I teach them attachment, and I watch the light go on in their eyes, and I know they're going to take it home and they're going to talk to everybody important to them in their life about it. That's what I'm excited about. I'm excited about the one next person I get to teach attachment to, because that one person is going to change the future.
That's incredible. And Adam, I gotta applaud you again for the work that you're doing here. I think it's so important. I'm glad that I had the opportunity here to learn more about it. I'm going to be spreading this like gospel to people that I know, and sharing this episode as well as your other work. Before we wrap up here, do you have any final words of advice, pieces of wisdom, or any actionable items, anything that you want to leave with the audience?
Absolutely. If any part of this episode has touched your heart and made you believe even for a moment that you can be loved, you're right. You can be loved. Look around you at everyone around you and tell me if you know anybody, especially any children, who don't deserve to be loved. You won't. You won't know any child who doesn't deserve it. You were a child once too, and if you weren't loved, you did deserve it. That's the difference. And now you believe that you don't deserve it because you weren't loved then. You still deserve love, and you can fix this, and you can connect to people who will treat you the way that you deserve to be treated, with real love.
I love it. I echo that message. And Adam, where can people find you online?
So the best place is my 100+ free deep dives on YouTube. Adam Lane Smith, Lane. Adam Lane Smith on YouTube is my best, absolute best. I'm also over on TikTok. I do 3 streams a week, hour-long streams on TikTok, free stuff, education. Again, free streaming right into people's homes. Over on TikTok, I'm at Attachment Bro over there, and I just run fun streams, and I get so many questions, and people are just, I love the live stuff because people are just pumped, so full of wanting to know, and I get to just answer questions right on the spot. So if you're on TikTok, hit me up there at Attachment Bro. If you're on YouTube, Adam Lane Smith. At either place, leave me comments, engage with the material, learn for free. If that touches your heart, I've got so much more for you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think this is easily some of the most important work that anyone could commit themselves to, is mental health and repairing family units. Truly, I really like, it's find a more important thing. I challenge you. It's like, it all starts with the family. It all starts with your mental health. And so thank you for doing all the work that you do.
Thank you.